What's poppin', everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the Commissioner's Office podcast. My name is Daniel, and today we're going to be discussing 4 NFL rules that I would like to change. But before we get into it, I just want everyone to kind of envision in their mind what they think of when they think of an NFL referee. Probably think of like an old guy, in like the black and white uniforms, and you probably don't really have a positive opinion of them. And I think to an extent, it's justified. The past few years, it seems, NFL refereeing has just been really, really inconsistent. We've seen countless times referees make a call based on a penalty or based on a challenge, and the replay review overrules it. Well, not overrules it, but it shows that they made the wrong decision, but they can't review it. So it's a tough situation to be an NFL referee. Every single bad call you make, people are on you and they always want to see you fired, which I'm sure it's bad for to be an NFL referee, but also I think they do have a responsibility that they should get the calls right most of the time. And I feel as an NFL fan that they don't personally. So this is what we're going to do. I have came up with 4 rules that I would like to see changed. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to explain the rule, what its intended use is, and what I don't like about it, and finally what the NFL could do to change the rule. So the first rule I mentioned will be the rule that I have the least strongest feelings about, and the final one will be the rule that I have the strongest feelings about. So let's just jump right into it. The first rule that I think should be changed by the NFL is the illegal block in the back. Now, illegal block in the back, it is a 10-yard penalty, which is pretty good. That's a pretty good penalty, So in the NFL rulebook, it defines a legal block in the back as this: the use his hands or arms to materially restrict or alter the defender's path or angle of pursuit. It is a foul regardless of whether the blocker's hands are inside or outside the frame of the defender's body. Material restrictions include, but are not limited to, grabbing or tackling an opponent, hooking, jerking, twisting, or turning him, or pulling him to the ground. So, I'll be honest, I don't really know what inside or outside of the frame of the defender's body means. I could make a guess based on it that it might be like, it might be maybe like from like your hips to like, it could be like as like interior as like the chest area or something, or like, like lower back, but I don't really know what they mean by that. But so one thing I was surprised about is when they say to restrict or alter the defender's path or angle of pursuit. Because the thing is, most illegal blocks in the back I see that are called in the NFL are complete BS. And what I mean by that is they don't actually have like anything to do with the play. They're like either on like a really obscure part of the field, or like he just like sticks, the blocker will like stick his hands on the guy he's trying to block, and then they'll call it. So I think what it's intended to do is like prevent people from like, if you can imagine this for me, you're in a kick return and the returner like passes you, and while he's passing you, you are trying to like block this guy, and with your back turned to the returner, and with the intention that the returner just goes right by you. But what the player trying to block is doing is he's trying to turn around and go around you and then tackle the returner from behind. I think what they're trying to do is like prevent them from using the player's back to like inhibit them in some way from, they're trying to use the player's back from like prevent them from turning. So the first thing they go to is like to like push them in the back. But the thing is, though, I don't really actually see it that many times that way. Many times that I see it, and especially when it's called badly, is when there's like a player that's going across the field after like a reception or some kind of like screen or something like that, and then like a wide receiver just kind of like touches the defender on the back, and then they immediately raise their hand up, and then that, the referee is like, okay, he touched him in the back, that's, a 10-yard penalty. And I really think that's just very dumb, in my opinion. I think that the illegal block in the back penalty shouldn't really, it's tough, because if you get rid of the rule entirely, then obviously like this is a huge thing that like this rule has been around for a while. So if you get rid of it, it's definitely going to be a change. But also, I don't see grabbing or tackling an opponent, hooking, jerking, twisting, or turning him, pulling him to the ground. I don't see that. And even when I do, they don't even call it as a legal block in the back. They call it as holding or something like that. So I don't really personally see why it's even in the rule book anymore. I think if all three of these things could be implied as holding, which, the implications of a rule I'm going to get to later. But I think what the NFL should do, in my opinion, is I think they should just get rid of the rule, because it's a valid rule in the case of if they're like shoving them in the back or something. But either way, on a kick return, like for example, if we kind of change the angle, why would you shove somebody in the back on a kick return? You're shoving them like into the returner. So I don't really see why that's like a huge thing. Hooking them and like jerking or twisting and turning them, that could all be called as holding, and pulling them to the ground could definitely be called as holding as well. And holding is also a loss of 10 yards. So I don't really see why it's still like, I don't really see why this rule actually has to be in the game. It's just, the thing is though, the thing about penalties in general is they just lower the quality of the game. People complain a lot about like, time of game and stuff. And I have, I have specific opinions on that, but that's a different topic. But part of the reason why the quality or the time of the game might be an issue for a lot of fans is because all these penalties are like, and when like half of them don't even seem to be called right, illegal block in the back is one of the most common penalties that is called incorrectly. It's just, I feel like this happens like once every few games, that there's at least one illegal block in the back penalty that really doesn't do anything to change the play. Because this is kind of what I see. Like, this is just my philosophy when it comes to, penalties in the NFL and just like in general. But like, I think of it, and this is going to come up in the other penalties, but like, does this really change the outcome of the play is something that I consider when you're calling it. Like, if a guy is, unless it's like completely excessive, if a guy like shoves a dude in the back, but he's like 30 yards behind where the returner is, does that really matter? Like, it just doesn't really make sense to me to always be calling this penalty, because it could be holding, but for some reason they have its own rule. So illegal block in the back, I think the NFL should just get rid of it. We'll move on now to the the second rule that I believe that the NFL should change. And this one I definitely have some stronger feelings about. This is not necessarily a penalty, but it can be as a result of a challenge. It's the 10-second runoff. The 10-second runoff is, to me, just one of the most lame rules in the game. And I'll read you the ruling. So this is exactly how the NFL rulebook defines a 10-second runoff. When a changed ruling results in a running clock for plays that begin after the 2-minute warning, the clock is reset to the time when the play should have ended, and the clock will run for 10 seconds from the reset time. If less than 10 seconds remain in the half of a game, the half or the game is over. That is the big part of the thing, because this has happened before, and the one instance of the game that I can vividly remember is there was a Lions-Saints game a while ago where maybe 3 seasons ago, where Detroit is at the goal line and they are at like the 2 yard line. They're trying to get a touchdown that I think would give them the lead, I believe. And Matthew Stafford like drops back. He throws this like little mini screenplay to Golden Tate, who cuts into the right, and then gets ankle tackled, reaches for the end zone. The initial call is that he has the touchdown, but after further review, and this is with like 9 seconds to go in the game, by the way, after further review, his knee was down, and it was a good call. His knee was definitely down. But the thing is, though, this play was reviewed and took so long to review that Detroit was like in the middle of, like a mini meeting, and like all the players are meeting with their coach. So by the time they make the ruling, there's a 10-second runoff. So Detroit doesn't even have time to get on the field to run another play, and they can't call a timeout to avoid the runoff. So I think that is the real killer. The NFL, again, for a league that's so focused on marketing, this 10-second runoff rule just completely eliminates climactic games. It's a very specific case, but I feel like it happens at least like one game per season. It's a really lame rule that I think is very unfair because it comes as a result of a changed ruling being either a booth review. Well, yeah, it has to be a booth review because you can't challenge within 2 minutes of a half. But I think what they can do to improve this rule, I would say, is you make them like the first thing you can do, you can make people be able to challenge within 2 minutes. So if you don't have any timeouts, you can avoid a 10-second runoff by giving up a challenge. Maybe that's something you can do. Or you can just get rid of the rule or just not run 10 seconds off the clock. Especially in these big situations, 10 seconds is like another play after the previous play ends to get to the line. Depending on what kind of play it is, you could get to the line, do a fake spike, throw a quick slant or something, and then boom, spike it again, all in under 10 seconds. I think it should be like maybe like a 5-second runoff, but like 10 seconds is the NFL making a dangerous assumption or estimation on how long it takes to get set in between plays on a 2-minute drill, which I'm not sure what the exact number is, but I would guess it's less than 10 seconds. It really depends on how well coached the team is, but I don't like the rule. It's just, to me, it's unfair to the offensive team because they can't control whether it's a booth review. Like the NFL decides itself if they're going to review something within 2 minutes. So what is the offensive team supposed to do? Just stay in formation like the entire review? So just when they call the 10-second runoff, they can immediately run the play? No, I think it's just a bad rule, and they should find something that a team can give up within that time frame to eliminate the 10-second runoff. Now, the thing is, though, there kind of is like they can avoid the 10-second runoff by taking a charged timeout. Now, if the game clock is avoided, or if the 10-second runoff is avoided, the game clock will be reset to the time when the play should have ended and will start on the snap. So that makes sense, but in a lot of these games where there's no huddle, if a team's in no huddle, they don't have any timeouts. That's just how it works. So, like, it doesn't really make sense why you take a charged team timeout. Now, I don't know what else you can give up. Maybe you take like a 5-yard penalty or something like that in exchange for a timeout, or maybe you give up a challenge if you make challenging within 2 minutes legal. That's just my opinion, but we will move on to the next rule. Now, this is starting to get a little bit more heated now. These last two I have very strong opinions of. A rule that has recently come to light in the past few years. You might know which one it is, but this is going to be roughing the passer. Now, the NFL in the past 5 years, I would say, has really made an effort to protect their quarterbacks, as now they're finally starting to see that this is a quarterback-driven league, and they are doing whatever it takes to make sure that they respect the golden gooses of the NFL, or the golden the golden geese of the NFL. So in theory, the roughing the passer penalty is fine. I don't have a problem with the actual penalty itself. It's just some of the interpretations of the rule that I think can result in a very bad call. So what I'll do is I'll read you what it says on the NFL rulebook. Any physical acts against a player who is in a passing posture before, during, or after a pass, which in the referee's judgment are unwarranted by the circumstances of the play, will be called as fouls. Now, there are 4 things that can be called as roughing the passer that I've gathered from the NFL rulebook. So the first one is the passer is hit after the ball is released. Now you might be thinking, Daniel, you can be hit after the ball is released. You can, but if it's like, I don't know what the rule is, but if it's I don't know what the exact rule is, and I don't think there is an exact rule, but like if it's, I would guess like within, like after 2 seconds maybe, or 1.5 seconds after the ball is released and you get tackled or something, that can be called as roughing the passer. That I don't have a problem with. Sometimes, well, the refs are usually pretty good about that first one. The second one is punishing contact / a body weight tackle. This has been the new one. Now, the NFL suggests the defensive player must strive to fall to the side of the quarterback's body or to brace his fall with his arms to avoid landing on the quarterback with all or most of his body weight. I'll talk about that one in a minute. The last 2 are hits to the head and neck area. I don't have a problem with that. And a hit in the knee area. Now, this knee area rule was put in, I don't know, maybe like mid-2000s, because I can't remember, maybe like 2004 or 2005, something like that. Carson Palmer, when he was still on the Bengals, he was in a playoff game against the Steelers, I believe the divisional round. This was like the best team the Bengals had in the last 20 years. So Carson Palmer is like dropping back on like a flea flicker or something, and he throws like a 85-yard touchdown, but the Steelers lineman like comes in and just grabs his right leg and, tears his ACL and MCL. But Carson Palmer is out for the season. He never really is the same with the Bengals, yada, yada, yada. And also Tom Brady tore his ACL in, I think, 2006 on a hit to the knee. So those numbers the first, third, and fourth points I read to you, those are usually called pretty well. The head and neck area one is like, it's a little iffy, because sometimes like they say, oh, if like the head snaps when you get hit, then that's warrants for a penalty, even though it's just like a natural reaction to being hit like in the shoulder. That one is a little bit iffy, but the second one is the one I really want to focus on. Punishing contact, there's nothing else I need to explain. If you go in there and just like clobber the dude for no reason, like, yeah, that's going to warrant a penalty. But body weight tackle, this is the one I really take exception to. This is, if you remember 2 years ago, I think, when Clay Matthews was, I think this is his last year at the Packers, he had 2 games in a row where like he sacked Kirk Cousins in week 1 or something, and he like lifted his legs as he was taking him to the ground. So he was not like, he was like riding him to the ground. So they called him on that, and the NFL didn't really give that much information beforehand that they were going to be calling that. So boom, that's a missed call right there, or at least a new interpretation of the rule that we did not know about. Second game, he does the exact same thing to Alex Smith. It looked a little bit better, and they still call it. So the problem with me of the body weight tackle is I just don't see how you can train players to do that. In my opinion, I think that it's just like natural, because you teach the players to finish the play. If you are in like the process of hitting a quarterback and he gets the ball out, you drive him into the ground either way. I'm no football player, but I've watched enough to know how they function. It's you are taught to finish the play. Like, that is the main object. You play through the whistle, right? So not even playing through the whistle, just play through the sequence of the quarterback throwing the ball away as you hit him. You still take him to the ground. But the problem is the NFL is implying here with the body weight tackle that it's the defensive player's fault if he falls on the quarterback, which is not really true. Like, it's no one's fault. It's just the natural part of the game. Bracing his fall is like, it's possible, but in the heat of the moment, you have like a split second to decide how you're going to tackle the quarterback. So like, I know you hear a lot of like, maybe like old-fashioned NFL fans who are like, you can't hit the quarterback these days. You can't do anything, in the NFL anymore. And to an extent, that's true. The NFL is trying to prevent all of these injuries, which is a good thing. But also, to a certain point, I feel like, you know what, man, they're football players. Like, they know the risks of playing football. They know that they are probably going to have long-term effects after playing football. Jamal Adams said it himself a few years ago, I think. Someone asked him about CTE, and he said, well, I mean, I'm doing the game. I'm doing the thing I love to do. So I don't really care about the long-term effects, which is not exactly what he said, but something like that. Like, the players know that they are going to have problems. They are going to get hurt. But also, like, honestly, if a quarterback can't take, like, if an NFL quarterback cannot take getting fell on a few times, they just shouldn't be playing the position, in my opinion. It's just like, I understand you're trying to protect them, but at a certain point, you just got to let the game play. You can't blame a defensive end for correctly tackling the players. If it's a head and neck area hit, of course, I think that the head and neck area penalties should be stronger in the NFL. I actually think they're pretty weak when it comes to that. But the body weight tackle, I think the rule has good intentions, but it just it's really hard to enforce, and it's also really hard to coach, because on the ref's end, you're always going to have those old-fashioned people who are like, oh, you're not letting him hit them properly, which, whatever. And then you're going to have, then on the player's side, how are you going to be like a defensive line coach playing in a completely different era, all those years ago, and then now you're coaching players to hit the quarterback completely different than how you did when you played. So, where I place on that spectrum is somewhere in the middle. Obviously, I don't want players to get hurt, but I also think that the players know the risks, and, this is what they signed up for if you're a quarterback. So now we are going to move on to the final rule. This one might be pretty obvious if you've watched the NFL for the past at least 2 years. This is the rule I have the strongest feelings about. The number one rule that I believe that the NFL should change is the pass interference rule. So yeah, if you watch the NFL, you've known that teams like the Saints have specifically gotten screwed over a lot. It started 2 years ago in the NFC Championship, where the Saints were driving, I believe, and Drew Brees throws this wheel route to Tommy Lee Lewis, and Nickel Roby-Coleman goes up to him with his back turned to the ball and just kind of like decks him for like no reason. Pass is incomplete. There's no flag thrown. Saints go on to lose that game in overtime. So then the NFL said, okay, let's review pass interference calls. So they made them challengeable. They rarely ever overturn them. And then now they got rid of the rule. So I'm going to read you exactly what the NFL rulebook defines pass interference. It is pass interference by either team when any act by a player more than 1 yard beyond the line of scrimmage significantly hinders an eligible player's opportunity to catch the ball. Pass interference can only occur when a forward pass is thrown from behind the line of scrimmage, regardless of whether the pass is legal or illegal or whether it crosses the line. So the pass interference rule it's really tough because, players or receivers and corners, it is a fight to the ball every single time. Unless you're Tyreek Hill, you don't have to do anything because you're just like a cheetah. But, those guys, they are doing everything they can to get the smallest advantage over their opponent so they can come down with the ball. And my problem with the pass interference call is this key point where in the rulebook it says significantly hinders an eligible player's opportunity to catch the ball. One of the big points with pass interference is it has to be a catchable ball, which is, I think the refs forget to consider a lot. I think that the pass interference rule is it's a sign of, the pass interference rule is not designed well and it's not executed well. The problem with it is that the NFL is trying to establish clear rules for a rule that is so opinionated. You cannot point at one specific thing and say, oh, that's pass interference, and then point at another thing and say, no, it's not. It's totally up to interpretation. Now, my idea for this podcast episode sparked when I was watching the Bears game last weekend. They're 5-1. Watch out, Green Bay. But there was a play where Teddy Bridgewater is going deep for DJ Moore down the left sideline. Jalen Johnson, the Bears' star rookie corner, kind of is hooking him sort of. So, DJ Moore's, I think it would be his right hand is kind of pinned between this little bit of a hook that Jalen Johnson is forming with his right arm. So I saw that, and they called pass interference, and that put them at the 1 yard line because there was an end zone shot. And it was I was talking to my brother about this, who's also a big football fan, and he said, oh yeah, no, that's clearly pass interference. He was hooking him, and of course that makes sense if you're preventing that, and that was a catchable ball too. I will establish that is a catchable ball, so no decision needed there. But what I will say though is that yeah, he was kind of hooking him, but also I think this is part of my opinion as well. It kind of was the same thing with roughing the passer. It's just let them play, man. To a certain point, you gotta let the hand fighting and stuff just go. You just gotta let it happen. Because do I think it was pass interference? I think you can make a case for it, but also it's what I call a weak call. When I say something is weak, is yeah, I guess it technically follows the rules, but it's it's almost following them too much. You might think I'm crazy for this, but in my opinion, the pass interference rule is not up for interpretation enough. I think it should just be how the Supreme Court functions. They interpret the Constitution. So the refs, and in this case, I think they should challenge pass interference calls. I think all penalties should be challengeable because, people who watch the NFL can complain about the game being too long, but ticket prices are already way too high, so that's not a problem. So the stadium should be able to entertain their fans for another few minutes. And if you're watching at home, just go do something for 2 minutes. Just go to the bathroom. I don't know, whatever. So I don't really care about that. I think they should be able to review it, but I think the refs should just use this rule as just a guideline, and they interpret it the way that they will. I think that's just how it should be, in my opinion, because we've seen this kind of thing before where it's just it's another thing. Another point of the pass interference is sometimes you see players push off but the thing is, half of the time it's not even a real push off. It's just they kind of press their hands against their back and sure, they kind of release a little bit, but then the player flops and tries to sell the call, which is what I really hate. It's the same reason why people don't like flopping in the NBA. No one actually likes when you sell calls. You know why? Because you're taking advantage of a bad rule that you're not even, that you know that the other player isn't even breaking just to get the rule to be used in that situation, which I think is bad for the game. And the other thing about selling the call that's so critical to the pass interference rule is if it's on the defense, it's spot foul. So like all you have to do in theory is just run a fly route, have the quarterback get off an accurate throw, and then just pull out your best improv skills and try to get a call sold, because then you get spot foul, get 30 plus yards on essentially cheating. Like, it's just cheating in my opinion. I think it's just really dumb how this is a serious strategy that players try to do. They try to sell the call, which is totally bad for the game. It just makes the players lazy, you know? Like, you can't, like, half the reason why people run fly routes is they're like, oh, well, if you can't catch the ball, then it's probably pass interference. That's just not how the game is supposed to be played. In my opinion, I think if you can see that a player is like flailing his arms up after he's supposedly pushed off of, I think that's a foul on them, personally. I think that it's not pass interference, but in my opinion, it's unsportsmanlike conduct. Is it a 15-yard penalty? No. I would say it would be more like a 5 to 10-yard penalty, but it's just selling the call. It's unsportsmanlike. So I think this is what the NFL should do. First thing they should do, if you're not going to make all penalties reviewable because you're concerned about the time of game, then just make pass interference calls reviewable. But you have to really look at them this time. You can't just cut away to a State Farm commercial for 30 seconds and then, be too lazy to review it. You have to actually look at it for a few minutes. Also, make the pass interference rule very open-ended. Establish the rules that you think can warrant pass interference, but take that into account, but then the refs had to interpret what they think. Do they think that's actually pass interference? Number one, is a player trying to sell the call? If so, it's on their side. Number two, is there enough pass interference to where it actually makes the play a different outcome? If there isn't, it's not pass interference in my opinion. You could in theory, you could shove a guy, but if it's 50 yards, if the ball is 50 yards underthrown, that doesn't change the play. It's still going to be underthrown. So I think that's what they have to do. The refs just have to act like Supreme Court justices and interpret the rule. It is not, pass interference is not supposed to be a clear rule. It should be an interpretation of the rule, which I think it also adds kind of an interesting dimension to the game as well. Kind of like how, specific MLB umpires call the strike zone differently. It's kind of like different NFL refs call the pass interference call differently. Because in baseball, the strike zone is an interpretation. I think it should be the same thing in a pass interference. So that's going to do it for the third episode of the Commissioner's Office podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please check us out on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and or WNTHradio.com. Leave a review on Apple Podcasts if you enjoyed the episode. We're always open to new feedback and new suggestions for different episodes. If you know me personally and you have a suggestion, you know where to find me. And for now, I will see you all next time.